Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and felt his stomach drop. The Galactic Medical Academy stretched before him like a crystal mountain, its walls shimmering with colors he had no names for. Floating platforms carried alien students. Between levels and holographic displays showed complex medical procedures in languages he could not read. He gripped his old military duffel bag tighter. Everything he owned fit in that bag, including his field medical kit that looked ancient compared to the technology around him. Other students glided past him without a second glance. Some had forearms, others floated in containment suits, and a few looked like walking crystals that sparked with inner light. "You must be the human," a voice said behind him. Jake turned to see a tall insect-like being with 6 arms and compound eyes that reflected his nervous face 100 times over. "I am Professor Kethmos. Welcome to Zentari Prime." Jake tried to remember the greeting he had practiced. "Thank you for accepting me into your program, Professor." The professor's mandibles clicked in what Jake hoped was amusement. "Come, I will show you to your quarters and introduce you to your fellow students." They walked through corridors lined with medical equipment Jake could not begin to understand. Machines hummed with power that could probably run an entire Earth hospital. Students practiced on holographic patients that looked and acted completely real. The air itself seemed alive with microscopic repair bots that glowed faintly as they moved. "Your species is young in the galactic community," Professor Kethmos said as they walked. "Tell me, what medical experience do you bring?" "I was a field medic in Earth's military for 8 years, Jake replied. "I worked in combat zones, disaster areas, anywhere people got hurt and needed help fast." The professor's compound eyes fixed on him. "Interesting. Most of our students come from civilized worlds where medical emergencies are rare. Your direct experience may provide a unique perspective." Jake bit back his response. He had heard the word primitive a lot since leaving Earth. The Galactic Council classified humans as a Level 2 civilization, barely advanced enough to join the greater community. Every alien he met seemed to think humans were clever children, playing with tools too big for them. They entered a large common area where students gathered around floating displays showing medical procedures. Professor Kethmos gestured toward a group near the window. "These will be your study partners," he said. "Zixara, Quintel, please meet Jake Morrison, our human exchange student." The first being looked like a walking crystal sculpture. Her body, made of clear material, shot through with veins of blue light. When she moved, the light patterns shifted like thoughts made visible. "Greetings, Jake Morrison," she said, her voice ringing like music. "I am Zixara of the Helix Nebula. My species interfaces directly with biocomputers to perform medical procedures." The second student was harder to see clearly. Quintel appeared to be made of gas or smoke contained within a shimmering force field. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I am Quintel from the Void Sector. I manipulate matter at the molecular level to heal injuries and diseases." Jake felt very small and very human. "I use needles and thread to stitch people back together." There was a moment of silence. Then Zixara's light patterns flickered rapidly, which Jake learned later meant confusion. "Thread? You mean actual physical filaments? How remarkably traditional." "We studied human medical practices in our primitive medicine course," Quintel added helpfully. "Fascinating how your species achieved anything before developing proper molecular reconstruction techniques." Jake's face burned, but he kept his voice steady. "We learned to work with what we had. Sometimes that meant saving lives with very basic tools." Professor Kethmos led them to a classroom where other students were already seated. The chairs adjusted automatically to accommodate different alien anatomies, but Jake's human-sized seat looked tiny among the others. He pulled out his notebook and pen while his classmates activated neural interfaces and holographic displays. "Today we will study advanced tissue regeneration using quantum healing matrices," the professor announced. A 3-dimensional model appeared in the center of the room, showing cells rebuilding themselves at the molecular level. This technique can regrow entire organs in minutes with no scarring or side effects. Jake scribbled notes as fast as he could, trying to understand concepts that his classmates absorbed instantly through their direct neural connections. The quantum healing matrix cost more than his home planet's entire medical budget. The portable version required a fusion power source and a team of specialists to operate. During the break, Jake overheard two students talking in the hallway. "Why did they accept a human?" one asked. "Their medical knowledge is centuries behind ours." "I heard. It was some kind of charity program," the other replied. "The council wants to help primitive species catch up to galactic standards." Jake pretended not to hear, but the words stung. He thought about his years as a medic, the lives he had saved with nothing but basic training and determination. He remembered pulling wounded soldiers from burning vehicles, treating civilians in bombed hospitals, performing surgery by flashlight when the power failed. Maybe his methods were simple, but they worked. That evening in his quarters, Jake unpacked his field medical kit. The instruments looked crude compared to the miraculous devices he had seen that day. Basic scalpels, forceps, needles, and surgical thread, bandages and antiseptic, a small scanner that could barely read vital signs. Everything was designed to work without power, to function in the worst conditions imaginable. He picked up a curved needle and examined it in the alien light streaming through his window. For thousands of years, humans had used tools like this to heal each other. They were simple, reliable, and effective. Jake had sewn up more wounds than he could count with, needles just like this one. Maybe the aliens were right. Maybe human medicine was primitive compared to their miraculous technology. But Jake had learned something in his years as a medic that no machine could teach. Sometimes the best solution was not the most advanced one. Sometimes what mattered was not having the perfect tool, but knowing how to use the tools you had. He put the needle back in its case and closed the kit. Tomorrow he would learn about alien medicine, but he would never forget the lessons that human medicine had taught him. Those lessons might prove more valuable than anyone expected. The transport ship shook as it landed on Centauri Prime's mining moon. Jake looked out the window at the rocky surface dotted with extraction facilities and worker settlements. This was their first field exercise, and he felt nervous about working alongside his alien classmates in a real environment. "Remember," Professor Kethmos announced over the intercom, "this is a routine medical survey mission. The mining colony has requested health assessments for their workers. You will work in teams to examine the miners and identify any occupational health issues." Jake gathered his basic medical scanner and joined Zixara and Quintel near the exit ramp. Over the past few weeks, his study partners had grown slightly less condescending, though they still treated him like a curious child learning to walk. "I have downloaded the complete medical histories of all colony personnel," Zixara said, her crystal body flickering with data streams. "My biocomputer interface will allow rapid analysis of their cellular structures." Quintel's gaseous form swirled within his containment field. "I can detect molecular-level contamination and toxic exposure with perfect accuracy. This assignment should be completed efficiently." Jake checked his simple scanner one more time. It could read basic vital signs and detect obvious injuries, nothing more. "I guess I'll just do what I can with what I have." They disembarked with the other student teams, each group assigned to different sections of the mining facility. The Ersan colony was rough and functional, built for work rather than comfort. Miners moved between buildings wearing protective suits, their faces tired from long shifts in the dangerous tunnels below. The medical survey began smoothly. Jake's teammates used their advanced abilities to examine miners in seconds, detecting trace amounts of harmful substances and microscopic tissue damage that would take Earth doctors hours to find. Jake helped by taking basic measurements and recording data, feeling somewhat useless but trying to contribute. They were halfway through their assigned section when the ground shook violently. Emergency alarms began wailing across the colony. Through the observation windows, Jake saw a massive transport ship listing to one side, smoke pouring from its cargo bay. "Transport crash in Section 7, a voice crackled over the colony's communication system. "All medical personnel report to the crash site immediately. Multiple casualties confirmed." Professor Kethmos appeared on their portable communication device. "All student teams respond to the emergency. This is now a real medical situation. Follow emergency protocols and assist as needed." Jake's heart raced as they rushed toward the crash site. This was what he had trained for during his years as a field medic, but his alien classmates had never faced a real emergency. Their medical education focused on controlled environments with perfect equipment and unlimited resources. The crash site was chaos. The transport ship had skidded into a storage facility, crushing metal beams and scattering cargo containers. Miners and rescue workers pulled injured people from the wreckage while others searched for survivors trapped under twisted metal. Jake counted at least a dozen casualties scattered across the area. Some had obvious broken bones, others were unconscious from impact trauma. Near the transport's cargo bay, he spotted a small figure lying motionless beside a pool of bright purple blood. "Zentari child," Quintel observed, his gaseous form moving closer to examine the victim. Male, approximately 8 local years old. Severe laceration across the torso from impact with sharp metal debris. Jake knelt beside the child, whose name, tag read Plix. The boy was conscious but pale, his large eyes filled with pain and fear. A jagged piece of metal had torn through his abdomen, leaving a deep wound that bled steadily despite the child's natural healing factors. "Critical blood loss detected," Zixara announced, her crystal form blazing with diagnostic information. "Patient requires immediate surgical intervention. Preparing portable medical facility." The alien students sprang into action with practiced efficiency. They began unpacking sophisticated medical equipment from their emergency kits. Portable surgery pods, nano-healing chambers, quantum tissue regenerators, and molecular repair systems emerged from compact storage units. Jake watched them work while monitoring the child's vital signs on his basic scanner. Plix's pulse was getting weaker, his breathing more shallow. The purple blood continued to seep from the wound despite the boy's attempts to press his small hands against it. "Sterilization field generators online," Quintel reported, his form spreading out to create a contamination barrier around their work area. "Molecular analysis indicates significant internal organ damage. Full reconstruction required." Zixara interfaced directly with a biocomputer the size of a briefcase. "Calculating optimal tissue regeneration patterns. This will require precise molecular alignment to ensure proper healing. Estimated setup time is 18 minutes. Jake looked at his scanner again. The child's blood pressure was dropping fast. His pulse was becoming irregular. Plix tried to speak but could only make weak sounds as shock began to set in. "How long did you say?" Jake asked. 18 minutes for full system initialization," Zixara replied without looking up from her work. "Then approximately 12 minutes for the actual procedure. This is quite fast for such complex injuries. 30 minutes total." Jake had seen enough battlefield injuries to know that Plix did not have 30 minutes. The child was bleeding out right now, and all the advanced alien technology in the galaxy would not matter if he died before they could use it. Other student teams worked on casualties throughout the crash site, all following the same methodical approach. Unpack equipment, run diagnostics, calculate optimal treatment parameters, initialize systems, then begin healing procedures. It was thorough, precise, and probably very effective under normal circumstances. But this was not a normal circumstance. This was an emergency, and emergencies required immediate action. Jake opened his field medical kit and pulled out a curved needle and surgical thread. The tools looked pathetic next to the alien technology surrounding him, but they had one advantage, that all the advanced equipment lacked. They were ready to use right now. Jake knelt beside the injured child and opened his field medical kit. The simple tools inside looked ancient compared to the glowing alien technology around him, but they had saved countless lives during his years as a medic. He pulled out antiseptic solution, a local anesthetic injector, needle, and surgical thread. "What are you doing?" Zixara asked, her crystal form flickering with confusion as she continued calibrating her biocomputer. "The medical systems require 14 more minutes to initialize properly." Jake did not answer. He focused on Plix, whose breathing had become more shallow in just the past few minutes. The child's eyes were starting to lose focus, a sure sign that shock was setting in. Jake had seen this before in wounded soldiers, and he knew exactly what it meant. "Hey there, Plix," Jake said softly, using the few words of Zentari he had learned. "I am going to help you feel better, okay?" The child looked up at him with large, frightened eyes but managed a small nod. Jake smiled and began cleaning the wound area with antiseptic. The solution was basic by galactic standards, but it would prevent infection just as well as any advanced sterilization system. "Jake Morrison, you cannot proceed without proper diagnostic analysis," Quintel warned, his gaseous form swirling anxiously. "We do not have complete molecular scans of Zentari physiology. You could cause permanent damage with such primitive methods." Other student teams working nearby began to notice what Jake was doing. Several alien students stopped their own equipment set up to stare at the human who was ignoring all standard protocols. Some pointed at his simple tools with obvious confusion. Jake loaded the anesthetic injector and carefully administered small doses around the wound area. Plix winced but stayed still, trusting this strange alien who spoke gently and worked quickly. Within moments, the numbing agent took effect and the child's expression relaxed slightly. "This is highly irregular," Zixara protested, though her diagnostic equipment was still running startup procedures. "Human medical techniques have not been approved for use on non-human species. The liability alone." Jake threaded the needle with steady hands, muscle memory from hundreds of similar procedures guiding his movements. He had sewn up knife wounds in dark alleys, bullet holes in helicopter medical bays, and shrapnel injuries in bombed hospitals. This was just another patient who needed help, regardless of what species he happened to be. "The child is dying," Jake said calmly as he positioned the needle. "Your equipment is amazing, but it takes too long to set up. Sometimes you need a solution that works right now." He began stitching the wound closed with careful, precise movements. Each stitch was placed exactly where it needed to be, pulling the torn tissue together and stopping the bleeding. Jake had learned long ago that good stitching was as much art as science, requiring gentle pressure and perfect spacing. Plix watched with fascination as Jake worked. The child had probably never seen such simple medical techniques before. On advanced worlds like Zentari Prime, injuries were healed instantly by machines that could rebuild tissue at the molecular level. The idea of using needle and thread to repair a body was completely foreign. "Look at that," Jake said to distract Plix while he worked. "Each stitch is like a tiny bridge helping your skin come back together. Your body knows how to heal itself. I am just helping it along." The bleeding stopped almost immediately as Jake closed the deeper parts of the wound. Plix's color began to return, and his breathing became stronger and more regular. The simple pressure of the stitches was enough to control the hemorrhage that had been draining his life away. "Impossible," whispered a crystalline student from another team. "How can such crude methods be effective? There is no molecular reconstruction, no cellular regeneration enhancement, no quantum healing matrix." Jake continued stitching, creating a neat line of sutures across the child's abdomen. "Sometimes the old ways work just fine. Human doctors have been doing this for thousands of years. We learned to fix people long before we had fancy machines to do it for us." Professor Kethmos arrived at the crash site with the emergency response team. His compound eyes took in the scene quickly, noting the alien students still setting up their equipment while Jake worked on the injured child with tools that looked like museum pieces. "Status report," the professor commanded. "Critical patient with severe abdominal laceration," Quintel reported. "We are preparing full molecular reconstruction procedures, but the human has begun unauthorized treatment using primitive techniques." Professor Kethmos approached Jake, who was tying off the final sutures. "Dr. Morrison, explain your actions." Jake looked up from his work. The child was bleeding out. "Your student's equipment is very advanced, but it needed too much time to set up. This boy did not have that time." He gestured to Plix, who was now sitting up and looking much more alert. "Basic stitches stopped the bleeding immediately. He is stable now." The professor's mandibles clicked as he examined Jake's work. The sutures were perfectly aligned, with no sign of infection or tissue damage. The child's vital signs had returned to normal ranges and the bleeding had stopped completely. "You performed this procedure without molecular scanners, cellular analysis, or biocompatibility testing," Professor Kethmos observed. "I used my eyes, my hands, and my experience." Jake replied. Sometimes that is enough. Zixara's biocomputer finally finished its initialization sequence, but there was no longer an emergency to treat. Her advanced equipment hummed with readiness, but the patient was already healed by methods her species had never bothered to learn. I do not understand, she said, her crystal form dim with confusion. How did you know the procedure would work without proper analysis? Jake packed his simple tools back into his kit. Because healing is healing, no matter what species you are. Stop the bleeding, close the wound, prevent infection. The principles are the same whether you use a quantum matrix or a needle and thread. Plix tugged on Jake's sleeve and said something in rapid Zentari. Professor Kethmos translated with obvious amusement. He says thank you for the tiny bridges. The medical academy was buzzing with activity when Jake returned from the mining moon. News of what he had done spread quickly through the halls. Alien students whispered to each other in their native languages, their conversations stopping when Jake walked past. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with confusion, and a few with what might have been respect. Jake tried to ignore the attention and focus on his studies, but it was impossible. In every class, professors asked questions about his primitive techniques. Fellow students wanted to know how he had known what to do without running proper diagnostics first. The whole academy seemed fascinated by the idea that such simple methods could actually work. 3 days after the accident, Jake was called to Professor Kethmos's office. He expected to be disciplined for breaking protocol, maybe even expelled from the program. Instead, he found the professor examining a holographic display that showed his stitching work in perfect detail. Sit down, Dr. Morrison, Professor Kethmos said, his compound eyes reflecting the hologram's light. I have been analyzing your procedure on the Zentari child. The results are quite remarkable. The hologram rotated slowly, showing every aspect of Jake's sutures. Each stitch was highlighted in different colors, with data streams showing healing rates, tissue integration, and cellular response. Your technique achieved a 94% healing efficiency, the professor continued. The scarring is minimal, the infection rate is 0, and the tissue strength is actually higher than baseline in several areas. Most impressive is the speed of recovery. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It was just basic field medicine. Nothing special. Nothing special? Professor Kethmos's mandibles clicked rapidly. Dr. Morrison, you achieved these results with tools that cost less than 1% of our standard equipment. You completed the procedure in under 8 minutes, while our fastest molecular reconstruction takes at least 30 minutes, even when pre-calibrated. The professor manipulated the hologram to show a comparison chart. I have run simulations, comparing your method to our advanced techniques. In terms of immediate results, resource usage, and time efficiency, your approach is superior in emergency situations. Jake stared at the data, hardly believing what he was seeing. But your technology can do things I never could. Regrow organs, repair genetic damage, cure diseases that would kill humans. True, Professor Kethmos agreed. Our technology excels in complex, long-term treatments. But you have shown us something we had forgotten in our pursuit of advancement. Sometimes the best solution is not the most sophisticated one. Over the following weeks, Jake found himself at the center of an academic revolution. Dr. Velnara, the Academy's chief of surgery, invited him to demonstrate his techniques to the faculty. Other professors began studying human medical history, amazed to learn that Earth doctors had been saving lives for centuries without molecular reconstruction or quantum healing. Your species developed remarkable adaptability, Dr. Velnara observed, during one of Jake's demonstrations. Working with limited resources forced you to find creative solutions. We have become so dependent on our technology that we forgot how to improvise. The demonstrations became regular events. Jake taught alien students how to tie sutures, apply bandages, and perform basic field medicine. It was strange watching. Crystalline beings and gaseous entities practice with needle and thread, but they were eager to learn. Zixara was among the most enthusiastic students. Her crystal form could interface with any computer system, but she struggled with the manual dexterity required for stitching. This is much more difficult than molecular reconstruction, she admitted after her 5th attempt at a basic suture. How do you make it look so effortless? Practice, Jake replied, guiding her crystalline fingers into the proper position. I have been doing this for years. Your people learned to use computers to heal. Mine learned to use our hands. The cultural exchange went both directions. Jake studied alien medical techniques and gained access to diagnostic tools beyond anything Earth had ever dreamed of. He learned to read molecular patterns, understand quantum cellular structures, and work with healing technologies that seemed like magic. But the aliens were learning something more fundamental. During a faculty meeting that Jake was invited to, the debate grew heated as professors argued about the implications of his methods. We have spent centuries perfecting our medical technology, argued Dr. Thexnos, a spider-like being from the outer rim. Why should we step backward to primitive techniques? Dr. Velnara responded with uncharacteristic passion. Because this human showed us that our perfection has made us inflexible. What happens when our technology fails? What do we do in situations where molecular reconstruction is impossible? The human's methods require no external power, added Professor Kethmos. They work in any environment, under any conditions. They are completely self-contained and universally applicable. The debate continued for hours, but Jake could see that minds were changing. The alien medical community was beginning to understand that advancement did not always mean complexity. Sometimes it meant finding better ways to use simple tools. The breakthrough came when Dr. Velnara announced the creation of a new department at the Academy. We will establish an emergency field medicine program, she declared. Dr. Morrison will serve as the primary instructor, teaching both human techniques and adaptive medical practices. Jake felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. I am just one person. I do not know if I can teach an entire curriculum. You will not be alone, Professor Kethmos assured him. We are contacting other species to learn their traditional healing methods. The Altarians have remarkable herbalism, the Forthanu sound healing, and the Keeper colonies have developed incredible surgical techniques using only natural materials. The Academy was changing, and Jake was at the center of it all. What had started as a simple emergency procedure was becoming a new philosophy of medicine. The aliens were learning that sometimes the best technology was no technology at all. But Jake knew the real test was still coming. Learning these techniques in a classroom was one thing. Using them when lives depended on it would be something else entirely. The emergency alarm screamed across Centauri Prime just as Jake finished his morning lecture on basic wound care. His alien students looked up from their practice sutures with alarm as the building shook violently. Through the classroom windows, Jake could see smoke rising from the city center. Major seismic event in progress, announced the Academy's emergency system. All medical personnel report to disaster stations immediately. Multiple casualties confirmed across the capital district. Jake grabbed his field medical kit while his students scrambled to collect their equipment. But as they rushed toward the emergency transports, Jake realized something terrible. The Academy's main power grid was flickering, and several of the advanced medical systems were already shutting down. The quantum healing chambers are offline, Zixara reported, her crystal form dim with worry. The molecular reconstruction units require more power than the backup systems can provide. Professor Kethmos appeared in the corridor, his 6 arms directing traffic as students and faculty moved toward the disaster zone. The earthquake damaged the main fusion reactor, he announced. We are operating on emergency power only. All advanced medical systems are non-functional. Jake felt a chill of recognition. This was exactly what Dr. Velnara had warned about. During the faculty debates, their perfect technology was useless when the power failed. In a few minutes, the Galactic Medical Academy would face its greatest challenge with nothing but the basic techniques Jake had been teaching. The disaster zone was chaos beyond anything Jake had seen before. Buildings had collapsed throughout the city center, trapping thousands of people under tons of rubble. Rescue teams worked frantically to dig out survivors, but the injured were arriving faster than the emergency systems could handle. We have over 3,000 casualties, reported Dr. Velnara as she surveyed the scene. Broken bones, internal injuries, severe lacerations, and trauma cases. Our portable medical units have no power, and the hospital fusion reactors are damaged. Jake looked at the sea of injured people spread across the emergency staging area. Without their advanced technology, the alien medical team stood paralyzed. They had trained for years to use molecular reconstruction and quantum healing, but those skills meant nothing when the machines would not turn on. "What are your orders?" asked Dr. Thexnos, his spider-like form trembling with uncertainty. Jake stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We use what we have. Form triage teams and separate the patients by severity. Life-threatening injuries first, then serious wounds, then minor cases. We work fast and we work simple." He opened his field kit and began distributing basic supplies. To the alien students, "Zixara, you take needles and thread. Focus on closing major lacerations. Quintel, you handle fracture stabilization using splints and bandages. Everyone else follow the protocols we practiced in class." The alien students looked terrified, but they began to move. Jake had spent months teaching them these techniques, but this was their first real test. Everything they had learned about working without technology was about to be put into practice. Jake moved through the casualty area like a battlefield medic, triaging patients and directing treatment. He showed Zixara how to close a complex abdominal wound using only sutures, guided Quintel through setting a broken limb with improvised splints, and taught a group of junior students how to stop arterial bleeding with direct pressure. "I cannot do this," Zixara said, her crystal form flickering with panic as she faced a badly injured Zentari miner. "My biocomputer interface is useless without power. I do not know how to heal people with just my hands." Jake knelt beside her, his voice gentle but urgent. "You do know how. We have practiced this dozens of times. Trust your training and trust yourself. The patient needs you to be confident." Slowly, carefully, Zixara began to stitch the miner's wounds closed. Her crystalline fingers were clumsy, at first, but muscle memory from weeks of practice began to take over. Each suture was placed with growing confidence, and soon she was working as smoothly as any human medic. Around the disaster zone, similar scenes played out as alien students discovered they could heal people without their miraculous technology. Quintel learned to feel for broken bones with his gaseous form, using pressure and intuition instead of molecular scanners. Spider-like Dr. Thexnos found that his multiple arms made him incredibly efficient at bandaging wounds once he overcame his fear of working manually. Hours passed as they worked without rest. Jake moved from team to team, offering guidance and encouragement. The basic human techniques were proving remarkably effective. Patients who would have died waiting for advanced treatment were stabilized with simple pressure bandages and basic sutures. As the sun set over the damaged city, Jake found himself working alongside Professor Kethmos to treat a young Zentari female with multiple fractures. The professor was using wooden splints and cloth bandages, materials that would have seemed impossibly primitive just months before. "I never imagined I would be grateful for such simple tools," Professor Kethmos admitted as he secured a splint around the patient's broken arm. "Your species teaches us that sophistication is not always an advantage." Jake smiled as he checked the patient's pulse with his fingers, a technique he had learned in his first week of medical training on Earth. Sometimes the best solution is the one that works when everything else fails. By the time rescue operations ended, they had treated over 2,000 casualties using nothing but basic medical techniques. The alien students had saved lives with needle and thread, stopped bleeding with pressure bandages, and set bones with improvised splints. Not a single piece of advanced technology had been used, yet the casualty rate was lower than any previous disaster in Zentari history. The next morning, Jake stood before the Academy's full faculty as they voted on a historic resolution. Dr. Velnara read the proposal aloud with obvious pride. "The Galactic Medical Academy hereby establishes the Department of Adaptive Emergency Medicine as a core requirement for all students. Traditional healing methods from all member species will be studied and preserved. Dr. Jake Morrison is appointed as the department's first director." As the vote passed unanimously, Jake thought about the long journey that had brought him here. He had arrived as a primitive human among advanced aliens, carrying nothing but basic tools and hard-won experience. Now he was helping to reshape galactic medicine itself. The last part of the ceremony was the most meaningful. Little Plix, the Zentari child Jake had saved on the mining moon, stepped forward with a small gift. It was a needle and thread made from Zentari crystal. Beautiful but simple. For making tiny bridges, Plick said in carefully practiced English. Jake accepted the gift with tears in his eyes, knowing that sometimes the smallest bridges could span the greatest distances.